The dust of the Mojave Desert had a way of settling into the pores of your skin and the fabric of your soul. For General Elena Vance, however, the grit was familiar. She stood at the edge of the Fort Irwin training grounds, dressed not in her formal class, a uniform with the 4 silver stars pinned to her shoulders, but in weathered, unmarked OCP fatigues. She wore no rank insignia, no name tape, and a dusty patrol cap pulled low over her eyes. To any passerby, she looked like a tired, middle-aged soldier nearing the end of a long career, perhaps a sergeant major or a specialized contractor. Elena was there on a blind inspection. She wanted to see the reality of the 12th Armored Division's readiness without the dog and pony show that usually accompanied a general's visit. She wanted to see the heart of the Army, the junior officers and the enlisted men, when they thought no one important was watching. She walked toward the motor pool, where a group of young lieutenants and captains were gathered around a stalled Abrams tank. Among them was Captain Mark Sterling, a man whose polished boots and arrogant posture suggested he felt he was destined for greatness, despite having never seen a day of actual combat. "Look at this piece of junk," Sterling spat, kicking the tread of the tank. "If the mechanics can't get this moving by 0600, I'm pulling their weekend passes. I don't care if they have families visiting." Elena stepped closer, her eyes scanning the engine compartment. She saw the issue immediately, a misaligned fuel secondary valve. "The bypass isn't seated," she said quietly, her voice steady and gravelly. "If you torque the mounting bracket 3 degrees to the left, the pressure will stabilize." Sterling turned, his eyes raking over Elena's unmarked uniform with pure disdain. A few other soldiers stopped to look. "And who invited the ghost to the party?" Sterling laughed, looking at his peers for approval. "Do you even know what a tank is, ma'am? Or did you get lost on your way to the PX?" The younger soldiers chuckled nervously. Elena didn't flinch. "I've spent 30 years inside those pieces of junk, Captain. I'm just offering a hand." "We don't need a hand from a nobody who can't even find her own rank patches," Sterling sneered. He stepped into her personal space, trying to intimidate her with his height. "You look like you're about a day away from retirement and a lifetime of obscurity. Why don't you go find some coffee and leave the real soldiering to the men who actually have a future in this man's army?" Elena looked him dead in the eye. "Rank doesn't make the soldier, Captain. Character does. And right now, your character is looking a bit malnourished." The crowd gasped. Sterling's face turned a deep shade of crimson. "You've got a lot of nerve. You're lucky I don't bring you up on charges of insubordination right now. Tell me, soldier, since you're so bold, what is your rank? What gives you the right to speak to a captain of the United States Army this way?" Elena smiled dimly. "I think you'll find out soon enough. But for now, let's just say I'm someone who knows exactly where the bodies are buried in this division." Sterling scoffed, turning back to his friends. "She's probably a disgruntled clerk. Ignore her. Hey, ma'am, make sure you're out of this restricted area before I have the MPs escort you out in handcuffs." Elena simply nodded, turned on her heel, and walked away. She didn't go to the MPs. She went to the base commander's office, where her security detail and her formal uniform were waiting. The silence in the base commander's office was so thick it felt like physical weight pressing against Captain Mark Sterling's chest. He remained at the position of attention, eyes locked on a fixed point on the wall, but his mind was screaming. Only 24 hours ago, he had stood in the dusty motor pool and insulted a woman he thought was a nobody. Now, that same woman sat before him with 4 silver stars on each shoulder, representing a lifetime of power, sacrifice, and authority that he couldn't even begin to comprehend. General Elena Vance did not look like a woman who was interested in apologies. She looked like a woman who was interested in results. She finally looked up from the folder on her desk, her gaze piercing through Sterling like a thermal scope. She told him that his career was not over, but his life as he knew it was. She explained that he was to be stripped of his rank insignia, his privileges, and his comfort. For the next 90 days, he would not be a captain. He would be Soldier Sterling, a man without a face or a title, assigned to the deepest, darkest pits of the maintenance depot. The first week was a blur of exhaustion and humiliation. Sterling was assigned to a bay managed by Chief Warrant Officer Miller, a man who had spent 30 years turning wrenches and had no patience for officer types, even those in disguise. Miller knew exactly who Sterling was, but he treated him like a fresh recruit who didn't know a crescent wrench from a screwdriver. Sterling's hands, once soft and clean, quickly became a map of small cuts, burns, and permanent black grease under the fingernails. He spent 16 hours a day inside the belly of M182 Abrams tanks, the very machines he had called pieces of junk. He was forced to scrub the grease traps, carry heavy steel treads that weighed hundreds of pounds, and endure the silent judgment of the enlisted soldiers who worked alongside him. They knew. The word had leaked. They watched the fallen captain struggle, waiting for him to snap, waiting for him to pull rank or complain. But every time Sterling felt the urge to scream, he remembered General Vance's eyes. He realized that this wasn't just a punishment. It was an autopsy of his character. By the second month, the physical pain began to numb, and a strange new clarity took its place. Sterling stopped looking at the clock. He stopped looking at his empty shoulders where his bars used to be. He began to actually listen to the men he had once looked down upon. He listened to Specialist Rodriguez talk about his 3 kids and why he joined the Army to give them a better life. He watched Sergeant Hall stay up until 3 a.m. to ensure a tank's cooling system was perfect, not because a captain ordered it, but because Hall knew that if that system failed in combat, the 4 soldiers inside would die. Sterling began to see the Nobodies as the giants they actually were. One night, a massive sandstorm rolled in, threatening to delay a critical deployment. The maintenance crew was exhausted, nearing their breaking point. Sterling, instead of retreating to the barracks, grabbed a flashlight and crawled back under a chassis. He didn't order anyone to join him. He just started working. Slowly, one by one, the other soldiers joined him. For the first time in his life, Mark Sterling wasn't leading through fear or rank. He was leading through the mud. In the final weeks of his exile, a crisis hit the base. A training exercise went wrong in the deep desert, and a recovery vehicle got stuck in a treacherous ravine. The technical manuals said it was a total loss, that the vehicle should be stripped and abandoned. Sterling, hearing the news over the radio in the pits, recognized the location. He remembered a specific maneuver General Vance had mentioned during their first encounter, a trick involving the redistribution of hydraulic pressure to the secondary winch. Without asking for permission, Sterling gathered a small team of mechanics. He didn't command them. He asked for their help. They drove out into the teeth of the desert. For 6 hours, Sterling worked in the blinding sand, his hands raw and bleeding, applying the very technical wisdom he had once mocked. When the recovery vehicle finally roared to life and climbed out of the ravine, the cheers of mechanics were the loudest sound Sterling had ever heard. It was better than any promotion. It was the sound of being accepted by his peers. When the 90 days were up, General Vance returned to the motor pool. She didn't find a polished officer waiting for her in a clean office. She found a man sitting on a crate, sharing a canteen of water with a private. Sterling's uniform was torn, his face was burned by the sun, and he smelled of diesel and sweat. When he saw the general, he stood and saluted. It wasn't the stiff, arrogant salute of a man trying to impress a superior. It was the quiet, steady salute of one soldier recognizing another. Vance walked up to him and looked at his hands, the hands of a mechanic. She told him that she had watched his progress every day. She had seen him in the sandstorm. She had seen him in the ravine. She told him that the Army had enough captains, but it was starving for leaders. She reached in her pocket and pulled out his silver bars. As she pinned them back onto his chest, she whispered that he was now a leader worthy of the men he commanded. Sterling didn't feel a sense of triumph. He felt a sense of immense responsibility. He looked at the 4 stars on her shoulders and finally understood the weight they carried. It wasn't the weight of power, but the weight of all the lives she was sworn to protect. What an incredible journey of redemption. Captain Sterling went into the pits as a man of rank and came out as a man of honor. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to Her Brave Stripes for more stories that prove character is the highest rank of all. We want to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, what's the most important lesson you've learned from a leader? And don't forget to mention where you're watching from. The deployment orders came down at midnight. The 12th Armored Division was being mobilized for a rapid response peacekeeping mission in a volatile border region halfway across the world. For Captain Mark Sterling, this wasn't just another rotation. It was his first time leading his company since his 90-day exile in the maintenance pits. As he stood on the flight line, watching the massive C-17 transport planes swallow up his tanks and his men, he didn't feel the usual rush of adrenaline or the desire for glory. Instead, he felt a heavy, quiet tether to every single soldier boarding those planes. He knew their names, their stories, and the names of their children. He knew which of them struggled with the heat and which of them could fix a radio with nothing but a paperclip and sheer will. He was no longer a man looking down from a pedestal. He was the foundation upon which they stood. General Elena Vance appeared on the tarmac just as the sun began to bleed over the horizon. She wasn't there for a formal send-off. She was wearing her flight suit, preparing to oversee the command element from the forward operating base. She walked up to Sterling, who was double-checking the tie-downs on a lead Abrams. She didn't say a word at first. She just watched him work. Sterling noticed a hydraulic leak on the transport's ramp, a small, shimmering puddle of red fluid. Without hesitation, he knelt in the grease, pointed it out to the loadmaster, and helped tighten the fitting himself. When he stood up and wiped his hands on a rag, he found the general standing 2 feet away. She looked at his grease-stained gloves and then at the silver bars on his collar. She told him that the real test was beginning. She warned him that in the field, rank would protect his ego, but only his character would protect his men. The mission was supposed to be a show of force, a deterrent to keep warring factions from crossing a demilitarized zone. But the reality on the ground was far more chaotic. Within 48 hours of landing, Sterling's company was diverted to a remote mountain pass to protect a humanitarian convoy carrying medical supplies to a besieged village. The terrain was brutal, narrow, crumbling roads flanked by sheer cliffs and dense forest. It was a mechanic's nightmare and a tactician's riddle. Halfway through the pass, the lead vehicle in the convoy hit a sophisticated roadside explosive. The blast didn't just disable the truck. It triggered a massive rock slide that cut off the convoy's retreat. Then, the ambush began. Small arms fire rained down from the ridgeline, the echoes making it impossible to pin down the enemy's exact location. In the old days, Sterling might have panicked or stayed safely inside his armored command vehicle, barking orders over the radio while his men scrambled. But the man who had spent 3 months in the grease pits was gone. Sterling vaulted out of his hatch before his sergeant could even protest. He didn't run away from the chaos. He ran toward the disabled convoy truck. He saw that the driver was trapped, the door jammed shut by the warped frame of the vehicle. Under heavy fire, Sterling used a thermal breaching tool he had insisted every one of his vehicles carry, a modification he'd suggested after his time in the maintenance base. He cut through the hinge in seconds, dragged the wounded driver to safety, and then did something that stunned his veteran sergeants. He climbed under the smoking chassis of the lead truck. He knew that if they didn't move that vehicle, the entire convoy was a sitting duck. He saw that the blast had severed the main steering linkage and ruptured the primary air line. While bullets pinged off the armored plating above him, Sterling worked with the same calm, methodical focus he had learned under Chief Warrant Officer Miller. He bypassed the air system using a spare hose from his own kit and manually locked the wheels into a straight-ahead position. He was covered in dirt, blood, and hydraulic fluid, looking more like a combat engineer than a company commander. When he slid out from under the truck, he signaled the recovery vehicle. "Pull it now," he roared. The convoy groaned forward, breaking through the debris just as the enemy launched a final, desperate assault. By the time the convoy reached the village, the sun had set. The medical supplies were delivered, and the wounded were stabilized. Sterling sat on the rear ramp of his tank, his head in his hands, shaking with the aftershocks of the adrenaline. His men gathered around him, but they didn't stand at a distance. They sat with him. They shared their rations. There was no mockery, no fear, only a profound, silent respect. They had seen their captain in the dirt, risking his life to fix a machine so they could live. They knew that he wouldn't ask them to do anything he hadn't already done himself. A week later, General Vance arrived at the forward base for a situation report. She walked into the command tent and found Sterling briefing his officers. He wasn't talking about medals or kill counts. He was talking about how to better reinforce the undercarriages of the transport trucks to survive similar blasts. He looked exhausted, his uniform a mess of field repairs, but his eyes were clear. When the tent cleared, Vance stayed behind. She handed him a cup of coffee, the very cup of coffee he had once told her to go find for herself. She told him that she had read the after-action reports from the convoy. She told him that the driver he saved was going to make it home to his family. Sterling took a sip of the coffee and looked at the general. He thanked her, not for returning his rank, but for taking it away when he didn't deserve it. He realized then that the brave stripes aren't the ones you wear on your sleeves. They're the scars you earn when you choose to serve those you lead. What an incredible conclusion to Captain Sterling's journey. He proved that a true leader is someone who is willing to get their hands dirty to keep their team moving forward. If you followed this 3-part saga, thank you for being part of the Her Brave Stripes family. Your support means the world to us. Please make sure to subscribe, like this video, and hit that notification bell. Final question for the comments. Where in the world are you watching this final chapter? Drop your country below and tell us, what was your favorite part of Sterling's transformation? We read every single comment. Thank you for watching and stay brave.